Hey adventurers, today is another Redwall review. This is for Mossflower by Brian Jacques. This is the second book that was written within the Redwall series. Yeah, so let's jump right in. So as I already mentioned, this is Mossflower by Brian Jacques. The genre for this book is fantasy and high fantasy and anthropomorphic fantasy, meaning it follows animals, or at least there are talking animals that exist. But yes, it does follow animals. The age range on the Redwall series is middle grade to young adult. Definitely more on the young adult side. They're not just strictly young adult or middle grade. They're more than that in some ways. As always, I will be following the 5 elements of story outline that we have given and used for all our reviews, or at least I do right now. Starting off with characters. This one, I was trying to think about it, and there are kind of a handful of main characters, but at the same time there's also kind of really only 2 main characters, or even 1 if you wanted to say it that way. The main characters are Martin and Gonf, really. Basically they become good buddies, friends, they deal with a bunch of stuff and go through a bunch of adventures together, and it's really well done. We'll get more into that later, I guess. So Martin is a soldier. What I have written down is that Martin is a soldier who has seen battle. He has dealt with much and still struggles with his past. He's kind, compassionate, and helpful, but strong and ruthless as well. So he's very much a warrior, but he's also very, he's that strong. He knows how to fight. He's been trained. He's done all this stuff for years, but he's also that kind of character who, being a warrior is part of who he is, but he also isn't strictly a warrior. There's other aspects to him as well. Gonf is known as the Prince of Mouse Thieves. He's kind of a thief with a heart of gold. So there's kind of that character archetype where he's a thief and he likes to steal, but he's also like hilarious and a great character and super funny and a great friend and all these wonderful things, but he's also a thief. So it's not like they're particularly unique character types, but they're just done really well. Gonf is quick-witted and funny. He's also a musician, so he's constantly composing little ditties or songs or whatever throughout the entire book, and it's just cool. I love how much Brian Jacques incorporates music and poetry into his books. It's very similar to Tolkien. There's, very different in terms of what the poetry is used for, but it's very similar in that it's there and it's not uncommon in the least. And back to Gonf, even though he is this fun, quick-witted, funny type character, he also knows and understands the gravity of the situation that the Woodlanders are in this specific book. And it's really interesting to see the many different layers of Gonf in that way, where he's got this attitude of this kind of happy-go-lucky attitude, but he's also can be very serious if he needs to be. As with all the Redwall books, there's many side characters or characters that are important to the story, or whatever. There's not strictly ever 1 main character or 2 main characters. There kind of is a little bit, but not really. They're all main characters, just some of them aren't introduced till later. Some of them, while they're there, it's a very important role, all that type of stuff. But every single one of the characters that you meet is very different personality-wise and has a very different character type. So, I just wrote down a couple of them off the top of my head. So there's Sarmina, who's vicious and power-hungry, but her character arc is very interesting and believable, and I can't really get into it because it's kind of spoilers for the end of the book, but it's really interesting to see the path that her character takes. Columbine, let's see. So Columbine is a sweet and caring character, but she isn't really given a ton of page time, but even with that limited page time, you still see her and you're like, okay, this is a great character. I love watching the relationship unfold with Columbine and the other characters. Bor the Fighter is a great and powerful character with a small but interesting role. So Bor the Fighter is a Badger Lord. He resides at Salamandastron. If you've read pretty much any of the Redwall books, you understand what that means. He's very powerful, very strong, very big, and just his personality is, it's not just his physical frame and size that is big. His personality and character is also big, just massive type of character. And even though there's all of that to him, there's also this not really gentler side, but more human side. I understand the irony of saying that an animal is human. That's the whole thing with anthropomorphic fantasy. But it's very relatable, I guess, side to him. And then the last character that I just pulled out is Bella of Brockhall. So Bella is the daughter of Boar. They're both badgers, if I didn't make that clear. But Bella is a major player with lots of depth. Seeing the rage that she can pull up when she needs to, but also the love and tenderness that she has towards the rest of the characters, she kind of sets the example for the rest of the Badger Mums, as they're called, throughout the Redwall series. And it's just very interesting to see how kind of she is this example of all these other characters going forward, and how she basically lays the foundation for really all of Redwall. There's so many more characters. I mean, the Mask is one of my favorite characters, super interesting. There's Denny, there's Logalog in here, there's Gingivier. There's so many of the characters that are just important to the story, and all very interesting and well-developed characters. For the plot, my brief synopsis of at least the start of the book, kind of, because I can't really give a whole lot of the book away in this, because it's supposed to be a spoiler-free review. So what I have given is mostly spoiler-free. It's all happens within the first 5 chapters, maybe. And so the Woodlanders of Mossflower have been tormented and enslaved for long enough by the wildcats living in the fortress of Katir, after a traveling warrior named Martin is captured and helped to escape by Gaunt, the Prince of Mouse Thieves. The Woodlanders finally feel like they have a chance of defeating the wildcats and freeing Mossflower. So of course that's basically the setup for this entire book. That's the inciting incident, I guess, and it leads into the rest of this book, and it leads into the story to come, and kind of determines the course of this story. It's kind of a very simple and even common, I guess, plot in many ways, but it's one of the best written plots in a children's book. It's got plenty of darker themes and messages, so it's not necessarily merely a children's book, but it has that wider appeal. It's got a quest aspect as well as many other classic fantasy tropes, and they're all very well done, which is the other thing. A lot of times you'll have stories that are something and they're specifically geared towards this one trope aspect, like a quest fantasy or something like that. The stakes in this book are actually really high. You feel the stakes, especially as you're going and characters are dying and you're like, why, how, what is going on? I don't understand. I mean, it's not like it's confusing, it's just you're thinking, isn't this supposed to be a children's book or at least a middle grade? But there's some more adult things like loss. There's stuff that that the characters have to deal with that you deal with in the real world. It's got high stakes, and there's some unwanted conclusions. There's some things that happen that you wish didn't happen. It gave you what you wanted, but not in the way that you wanted it, which is what a good story is supposed to do. The themes of Mossflower are way stronger than I was expecting. I was listening through it and I'd hear a line and be like, wow, that basically explains the whole, one of the major themes of this entire book through one line. And so I don't think I ever really wrote word for word down any of these lines, but I got the ideas that were being presented through this. And some of these themes were peace is preferred, but sometimes war is necessary. We don't like violence. The characters in the Mossflower series don't like, or in the Redwall series, don't like violence. They don't want to constantly be at war, constantly have to defend themselves from the vermin that are attacking and that are pillaging and trying to enslave and murder and steal and all the things that they do. They don't want that, but they understand that when it comes, they need to be ready for it. Also, a sword is merely a tool. It is the wielder who does the good or evil with it. It's this idea that a weapon isn't just a weapon. A weapon doesn't kill people, it's the person wielding the weapon that kills people. A sword just sitting there does nothing. It's once the character picks it up that the sword is then going to commit either an act of good or an act of evil. And that theme is very prevalent in this story, very much in that Martin has to deal with this fact that maybe he shouldn't be a warrior, maybe he shouldn't carry a sword, but he still has to decide if he's going to or not. And then the last major theme, I mean, of course there's always the minor themes of do good, whatever all those, or do right, whatever the themes are that we mentioned that should be in every book. There are those in this story as well. But this other third major theme that I notice is your tools don't make you something, your training and your mindset do. So you can have the greatest I mean, you see this in the world today, you see all these people with fancy this and fancy that, but then when you come down to it, they maybe don't even know how to use those fancy things that they have. It's not what you have that makes you who you are, it's how you use it, the training you have, and the mindset that you have. So that's a very important theme to this book as well. Overall, they're just really strong themes and presented in ways that make sense. They're very tactfully done, meaning they're not blatant and in your face, but if you're looking for themes, you will very obviously find them. They'll stick out to you and you'll be like, wow, that was well done. So for world/setting, this is set in pre-Redwall Abbey Mossflower. So it's Mossflower that we all know and love from the rest of this Redwall series, but it's slightly different in that it takes place before Redwall Abbey was built. It's very different, but very much the same. We also see a good bit of the path between Mossflower Wood and Salamandastron. We've seen paths between Redwall and Salamandastron, or Mossflower and Salamandastron, many times in many of the other books. But this one, as with all of them, it takes you on a slightly different path than normal, and you get to see some different areas of the world, different aspects of the world that are very interesting. This isn't really a spoiler, but the scene with it's not really a spoiler because I'm being so vague with it, but the scene with the crab is one of the greatest scenes in the Redwall series. So once you get there, you'll understand if you read it. If you have read it already, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. For the uniqueness factor, once again, this is anthropomorphic fantasy, meaning it's following animals, or at least their anthropomorphic fantasy means there are animals with human characteristics that take on human characteristics. But the main part of this uniqueness factor that I like to talk about with fantasy books is the magic system. The magic system is never prominent in the Redwall series. It's never a major influential factor to the overall story of the book. But in almost every single book in the series, there is one scene where it really becomes takes on a major role and becomes very important to that specific moment. This one has one, and it's one of the best, most interesting scenes in the book. There's a lot of really good scenes in this book, but it's just really interesting to see how the magic system plays into this specific story, but also the issues that it causes, kind of. It's really well done, and it's really interesting to see how it all works out. For my general thoughts, I kind of didn't really remember enjoying this one, or let me rephrase that. I didn't really remember this one being a favorite of mine in the Redwall series, and I don't think that it is still. But after rereading it, it's a lot better than I remembered, and I mean, I love them all. I've said this before. I love all the books in the Redwall series, but there's always been some that I have thought are way better and way more interesting. This one is now up there way higher than it was previously. It's super well written, and it's really just the execution of all the aspects of the story are really well done. My biggest issue with this one comes from the fact that it was the second book written in the series, which leads to some continuity issues with the rest of the series, and that things established in other books don't quite line up with this book. So you could say that the other books don't make sense with this book, but because this is kind of the only book that does it, it kind of doesn't make sense with the rest of the world that's been developed in some ways. It's very minor in these continuity issues. There's things that just seem a little bit off in terms of timeline, in terms of whatever it might be. It's not enough to ruin the enjoyment of the book or the story, but there are some things that you feel like should be mentioned in this book that aren't. It's really well done how Brian Jacques was able to incorporate the things set up in Mossflower into the storyline of Martin the Warrior and stuff like that, but there are some things that are kind of a little bit off still. The story itself is easily one of the best in this series. It's, I would say, even if it isn't my personal top 5 in terms of enjoyment, it's easily top 5 in terms of quality of the story, quality of the writing and everything about the story itself. As always, the writing style is super easy to read, super easy to understand. The characters are all distinct and unique, and rarely does it fail to draw you in. The writing style is never simple or boring or too young feeling. It doesn't ever feel like it's spoon feeding you, trying to lead you along a little bit, hold your hand and make you understand. It's kind of making sure that you have all the information necessary to understand, but not forcing that information down your throat. You will easily come upon the understanding just by reading the book. You don't have to, it doesn't have to drag you along and make you understand. Overall, I rated this book a 5-star book. It's really well done, way better done than I remembered it being, and just the story of it and everything about it is so much better than I remember. Even if it's still not a personal top 5, it's still really, really good. So that's it for my review of Mossflower by Brian Jacques. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and comment down below if you did, and if you've read this book or any of the books in the series. I'm excited to, I know I've got some friends that are just getting into the series, and I'm excited to hear their thoughts and opinions of the series as they start reading it. So I hope there's some other people on BookTube that are going to be watching this that have, if you haven't read the series, this makes you want to read it and get into it. Thank you for watching. We post videos every Monday and Thursday. We have our social medias linked down in the description box down below. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay warm.